Well, hi. Chapter 4 was ass. Okay, I'm semi-joking, but in all seriousness, Chapter 4 definitely took a turn for the worse, in my opinion. There was a lot of problems with Chapter 4 Fortnite that I'm going to discuss in today's video. Now, I put out a tweet kind of explaining it, but because I didn't buy Twitter Blue, because who the hell wants to pay for Twitter, I couldn't really get my point across. And because of that, let's just say Twitter was a little upset that I didn't like Chapter 4. And that tweet is getting flamed. And I'm not standing down. I'm going to make a good, valid point, hopefully, about every single problem I had with Chapter 4 on every season, going across the map, the storyline, and the gameplay. Everything. I found a lot of issues with Chapter 4 that I need to get into. This is a completely unscripted video, by the way. But, yeah, I just want to make a disclaimer as well. We'll not be going into UEFN in this video. UEFN is a whole different can of worms that I really don't want to get into, because otherwise this video will be going on for hours, because I could rant about UEFN a lot. For both good and for bad. But the main thing with UEFN is, like, let's just ignore it. Fortnite is in a state of identity crisis with Chapter 4, and I feel like now is the best time to get kind of into why, more so on the Battle Royale side of things. Of course, we've got the whole UEFN Roblox argument, but again, that's not the topic. We're going into Battle Royale in today's video, so let's get into that. So we're gonna go, again, completely unscripted, through different topics in order. We'll start with the map, and then the gameplay, and then we'll get into the storyline aspects. So, the worst aspects, I feel, of the map is, the main argument that I had on Twitter, mostly, was the map felt too repetitive. Like, landmarks and POIs shed assets, making it very much the same no matter where you go. And I feel like the main issue, and the biggest example of this, was Chapter 4 Season 1. Season 1 was, of course, the medieval New Beginnings season, with the Ageless, Selen, and all of the Oathbound stuff, right? The main problem with that season in particular is that over the entire map, no matter where you were, you pretty much had the same assets. All of the medieval buildings were everywhere. The same castle towers were everywhere. And this was definitely fixed in Season 2 when the Sakura biome took over the entire bottom right corner of the map. And this was a really good change because a lot of the medieval buildings were cut when that happened. It made the map feel a lot more unique. However, that didn't resolve one of the other areas of the map. And this area pretty much went untouched for the entirety of Asteria's lifetime. That being the snow biome. The snow biome especially needed some change. Because Brutal Bastion was this kind of 70s styled snow fortress. But every single building in that biome used the same assets, so none of it felt unique. And I've also seen a lot of people putting words in my mouth saying that I'm saying Chapter 1 was so much better. Chapter 1 had so many problems of its own. Like, the same building is all over the place. It was very Save the World themed. I didn't really like the Save the World prop landscape that Chapter 1 very heavily utilized. But, like, when it comes to repeated use of assets, I think the best example that I can think of off the top of my head for this was the 7 outposts of Chapter 3, because they were confined to their own small area in the corners of the island, and nowhere else except for Sanctuary, which was their main POI. It wasn't restricted to one biome, making that whole area of the map feel the same. They were all separated in their small, tiny, confined areas. So I was completely fine with them because I was like, okay, yeah, we can go to this outpost. But when you're going to the snow biome in Asteria especially, everywhere you go was like, oh yeah, let's go to this one building. What building? I don't know, they all look the same to me. And this was definitely, again, the worst case during Chapter 4 Season 1, because all of the medieval areas felt the same as well. And when it comes to repeated assets across the entire island, it makes certain POIs really hard to memorize. And I'm gonna use 2 examples of Asteria for this. The first was Anvil Square, Breakwater Bay. Those 2 POIs didn't really have a main building, to say the least. And if it did, it didn't stand out enough from the others to be like, oh yeah, this is what makes this POI special and unique. This is the main centerpiece of the building. So it just kind of felt like a cluster of reused assets the entire time. Not to mention Last Resort. Last Resort, in my opinion, was the best season of Chapter 4 so far, with the exception of Season OG, because Season OG, again, not Chapter 1 bias, I will get into it later, was... The problem with Last Resort is the 3 POIs were the exact same. Eclipse to Stay, Sanguine Suites, and Relentless Retreat just used the same assets the entire time. Now, I like the whole spy theme, again, of breaking into a place, opening the vault, and stealing all the cool loot and the mythics. That was cool. Chapter 2 Season 2 did it best. But the reason why Chapter 2 Season 2 did it better is because every POI was different. You didn't feel like you were landing at the same location every time you dropped in of Chapter 2 Season 2 spy POIs. But with Last Resort, it's a fancy hotel, another fancy hotel, and then a fancy mansion, but they all use the same assets. So everywhere I went, it just kind of felt the same. Like, I don't really remember the layout of any of those POIs because they all were just the same assets. And not to mention, we don't have enough time to explore these POIs anyway, because chapters are only 1 year long now, which I think is stupid, because it's hard to get attached to a map at that point. Anyway, let's get into my next point, which is too many clashing themes. So, with all these themes, they are very unique. I will definitely give that point. They are unique. However, I feel like they're a little too unique. Fortnite Chapter 4's POIs follow a specific stereotype for each one. The jungle goes with jungle ruins, the Sakura biome is, Japanese culture. And then you've got the medieval biome, which is all castles and old-timey brick buildings. You've got the main modern biomes with the farm and whatnot, slappy shores. And then you've got the snow biomes with their snowy brick fortresses. The problem is, they follow their stereotypes to a T. There is no originality to those themes. So while they're very stylized and very beautiful, none of them feel as unique as, I guess, they have no identity to them. So when you just kind of throw all these themes together, Fortnite just kind of feels like it's in an identity crisis. Like, what is the map trying to be? And don't get me wrong, Chapter 1 does feel a little bland and boring by comparison, but the main problem with the map right now is the Chapter 1 map we have right now isn't the one we had back then. We're missing parts of the snow biome, we're missing the entire tropical biome, the volcano is gone. All of the fun POIs like Neotol and Megamore are gone. We don't have those right now with Fortnite OG. But even then, Chapter 1 had a ton of issues with its own map. I personally feel like Chapter 2 had the best map for identity in my opinion. Chapter 2, again, when it first started, everyone liked Season 1. The problem was, Season 1 was so long that it went through a huge content drought and people got bored really quickly because there was nothing new being added to the game, with quite literally the sole exception of the harpoon gun. That was it. But Chapter 2's map had a ton of memorable locations. While yes, the main problem with that map was the map changes were always in the middle and never stuck around, the map changes that we did get outside of the middle did stay around. And those ones were fun. They shaped the map. I feel like Chapter 2 as well just had a ton of personality to its locations. Especially some of the POIs, like the Agency, I think, was a really good... It was the first POI of its kind, and I think it hit the nail on the head with that POI. It was incredibly good. Then Steamy Stacks was another really good example. Slurpy Swamp, another really good example. Chapter 2 had a ton of memorable POIs, and Chapter 1 did as well, but at least Chapter 2's map just kind of felt more streamlined, I suppose? Because they put together the map for Chapter 1 in 2 months. I don't know if you guys knew that. But back to Chapter 4, the next problem that I have is the jungle. I think a lot of people had quite a lot of problems with the jungle biome in particular, and I completely understand why. The jungle was really difficult to fight in. And the trees, I like that you can go in the trees. The trees were cool, but they certainly didn't help. The jungle had so much foliage, which, I mean, I guess is the point of a jungle, but just in general, the jungle wasn't fun to navigate through, it wasn't fun to fight in, and the jungle's POIs kinda sucked. I'm not gonna lie. And not to mention, the jungle had the exact same problem as the snow biome. So at least with the jungle, you did have some unique POIs. Like Creaky Compound was confined to itself, and I like that. But Rumble Ruins and Shady Stilts, oh my god. Especially Rumble Ruins. The same temple issue that we had with Brutal Bastion and the snow biome rang true in the jungle again. And I don't really know how to feel about that. Because everywhere I went in the jungle, it's just the same temple again. And I guess it wasn't as bad as the snow biome in terms of repetition, but it was still pretty bad and unfun to explore. The jungle was just bad. Wow, that was a shit voice crack, oh my god. But no, I don't like the jungle, man. I don't think anyone really likes the jungle. But there's 2 other points I have about Chapter 4's map that I didn't really enjoy. And other than just, the not-so-memorable POIs and landmarks, the map didn't really feel connected. I get that the whole point of Chapter 4 was it was, thrown together by Zero Fusion, which, it was an interesting concept to dabble in, but the problem is, this is something that I've definitely talked about to death about Chapter 2 and 3 in particular, but at least with Chapter 2 and 3, roads connected the entire map together. No matter where you went, if you followed the road, you would end up somewhere new. That is not the case with Chapter 4. The roads will split at the biome crash. So what I'm going to refer to as the biome crash is where biomes were pieced together by the 0 point, and there's these massive cracks splitting them apart. When you reached those points, the roads were completely cut off, meaning your sense of navigation was taken away from you. That is because there's no sense of navigation, you can't just follow the road to rotate and end up somewhere new. And this was especially bad for new players in my opinion. I didn't like that about Chapter 4. And not to mention my other point, there's too many mountains. And Chapter 1 definitely had this issue as well. There was a lot of mountains, and that was good. It was good. Chapter 1's mountains were good. Because even though they could, they were hard to get up if you couldn't build, which is especially a problem with Zero Build. I will get into that with Fortnite OG in a bit. But at least with Chapter 1's mountains, there was good high ground, natural high ground, and good natural cover. Chapter 4's cover didn't feel natural. All of the mountains were, triangular and just ramps and slopes. They didn't feel right, at least to me. I just didn't really like Chapter 4's landscape that much. And again, this is another problem with Chapter 1 as well. Chapter 1 and Chapter 4's landscapes were very heavily prop-based. More so on Chapter 4's end than Chapter 1's, but because of the prop terrain, a lot of the terrain doesn't feel natural. Some parts will just immediately transition to being flat, or just angular. It didn't feel right. And I feel like for Chapter 1, the worst case of this, at least to me, is Fatal Fields. Fatal Fields, and Loot Lake as well, have so much fake terrain that it's incredible to me how it just doesn't feel like the rest of the map does. And Chapter 4, everywhere you go, there's prop terrain everywhere. And it just doesn't feel good to me. It doesn't feel fun to run around in. But that's enough about the map. Let's get into the gameplay. The gameplay aspects of Chapter 4 were very flawed as well. The first one is, I mean, this is just a point in general, the gameplay was too convoluted. There was way too many things to consider while playing, so Fortnite was a lot harder to get into, and it was a lot harder to have fun. The simplicity of the game was taken away over time. And don't get me wrong, this was a problem with Chapter 3 as well, and kind of Chapter 2 in some aspects. Yet again, I still think Chapter 2 was the best chapter we've ever had, and I'm going to stand by that, at least for now. But I just feel like Chapter 4 really took it up a notch. So, let's start with hurdling. Hurdling was vaulted, and don't get me wrong, so something with me is I love movement. As a person who loves fast-paced gameplay, I really do like built-in movement options. Mantling, tactical sprinting, sliding are all amazing additions. And I am pro hurdling, actually. I think hurdling was an amazing addition because I actually really like doing that. I don't like having to just run up to a wall and jump over it. I like just running into it and be able to go straight over it. I think it was cool, I think it was fun. But I guess some players didn't like it and they vaulted hurdling after a bug and never brought it back, even though they fixed that bug. So, the main movement mechanic of the chapter was removed after like 2 weeks of it being in the game. And that didn't really sit right with me, but I mean, fine, whatever, hurling's not as important. But then we come to the overabundance of mythic weapons. Oh god, here we go. So, mythics in chapter, like, just from chapter 2 to chapter 3, there was only a few per season, and they would implement the occasional event mythic, and that's fine, it's for an event. But oh my god, chapter 4 made it so much worse. So, once an IP collab happened, that mythic was in the game for the rest of the season. Things like the Todoroki Ice Wall, or the ODM gear. Like, those were in the game for that whole season. Cybertron cannons too. But, not to mention, Last Resort in particular. I like going into vaults and getting mythics, that was cool, but there was so many of them. Ever since Season 2, there has been a huge overabundance of mythics, and exotics too. We can't forget about the most wanted exotics, because I'm gonna count those towards this argument too. There was so many mythics and exotic weapons in the loot pool that it kind of made all the other loot just not feel worth it as much, because it was just more worthwhile to carry a mythic weapon. Because they were everywhere. Mythics were everywhere. It kind of defeated the purpose of the mythic rarity, in a way. Mythic rarities of, you know, special case weapons, and tier 6 weapons that you get from defeating bosses and opening vaults. But especially towards the end of Last Resort, where they added the mythic grab bag augment, and we'll get into augments. Just, mythics. I feel like mythics were done best when they were first introduced. Keep them specifically to bosses, and only have one of each. And keeping it that way. Mythic Grab Bag completely destroyed that. Vaults destroyed that. Like, having mythics tied to vaults as well as boss mythics was way too many. Like, there were games in Last Resort where I was running a loadout of 5 mythic weapons, and I guess Ocean's Chug Jug is the 5th. That shouldn't be possible in a game. Like, that shouldn't be possible to pull off every game. That's insane. But mythics weren't the only powerful item during Chapter 4. This item I have talked about to death, and I will never stop talking about how terrible this item is. Slurp Juice. Oh my god. Here we go. Slurp Juice was by far the worst addition or change they've ever made in Fortnite history, in my opinion. Having one healing item be so immensely powerful and so immensely common and easy to get your hands on is stupid, because it renders every other heal redundant. And when it comes to Season OG, the main problem with heals right now I think is the Chug Jug. The Chug Jug is still insanely common. Like, I've seen way too many of them in certain games, and I feel like they could, even though we're basically at the end of Fortnite OG at this point, I still feel like they should nerf the spawn rate of the Chug Jug. And I feel like the reason I feel that way as much is because of Slurp Juice. But the Chug Jug isn't that bad because it takes 15 seconds to consume. Slurp Juice takes half a second to drink, And when you're drinking it, and the second you've drunk it, you are getting 3 health and 3 shield every second. You heal so quickly, and they're so easy to come by, that there's no reason to carry minis, medkits, medmists. No reason to carry any of it anymore. Because you just carry Slurp Juice all the time. And if your game is making other items feel redundant and useless because one item is so immensely powerful, you need to balance it. And even though they nerfed the spawn rate of Slurp Juice, they didn't nerf it enough. The damage was still done, and people were still only carrying Slurp Juice. It was a stupid change. And the other place you got Slurp Juices from, other than vaults and stuff, was places like the Loot Island. Loot Island was a bit of a letdown, honestly. Like, we were told we'd be getting other changes and things to Loot Island on blog posts, but it just stayed the Loot Lake House the whole time. And don't get me wrong, Loot Island was fun, it was fine. It was just a bit of a letdown that it was the same building again, from Chapter 1 and Chapter 3. Like, the Loot Lake House it's kind of overused, honestly. But I mean, it's fine, it's whatever, it's called Loot Island, Loot Lake House, it makes sense. But then we get into another issue with Chapter 4, and that is the mobility item reliance. Now, don't get me wrong, those items are the best things we've ever, they are so fun. The Shockwave Hammer was amazing. The Kinetic Blade is probably one of my favorite items ever that they've ever added to the game. The Kinetic Boomerang was not even a mobility item, don't even get me started on that thing. And the Rocket Ram was cool too. But the problem is, those items felt incredibly important to carry around. Like, if you didn't have them, you were at a disadvantage. So, like, I mean, the Rocket Ram less so, because they introduced the Witch Broom, which, by the way, is a mythic mobility item. Overabundance of mythic weapons, made that point already. And, you know, it's another mobility item, which is a part of this point. The Witch Broom, just aye. But, oh yeah, Season 1, ODM gear. Season 2, we also had the Spider-Man glove. You seeing my point here? Everywhere you went during Chapter 4, in every season, there was some heavily utilized mobility item. In Season 3, it was shockwave grenades, I guess. Season 3 was a little better for mobility. But the problem with these items is if you didn't carry them, you were at a disadvantage compared to everyone else who was carrying them. And I feel like the Kinetic Blade especially was the worst offender of this, just because of how overpowered its mobility uses really were. The infinite charges, how easy it was to use compared to like the Shockwave Hammer or the Rocket Ram. The Kinetic Blade had so much directional control, it was ridiculous. I don't think I've seen a more broken mobility item in the game in my life. And now we get into the next point, which is reality augments. Reality augmentations were a pretty big letdown because they felt redundant. Now, for a while I was very pro-augment, because I thought augments were cool. They encouraged you to try different loadouts. But the augments just add to the convoluted nature of the game that Chapter 4 became, but also that most augments just didn't really have much of an impact. Extra ammo, like when you slide, or some of the things like every time you search a chest you get a consumable. Like, they were mostly consumables that you didn't really carry. So, for example, I get an augment, I search a chest, and I get an apple from the chest. When do you ever carry apples, especially when Slurp Juice is in the game? Or the Shockwave one, like, that we had during Last Resort. It was like, okay, I will carry Shockwaves. Shockwaves are more useful in build, but when you're in Zero build and you have a Rocket Ram, most people are going to choose the Rocket Ram over the Shockwaves. And then there's the Foraging augment, where you had to break things, and every time you broke a tree, you got fruit from it. Again, why carry fruit when I can carry a med mist? Some of these augments felt pretty useless. And some of them were absolutely cracked. Like, for example, Mythic Munition. If you built a loadout with Mythic Munition and all of the things regarding light ammo and pistol reloads, you would have an amazing starter pistol. Like, you see those memes of maxing out the starter pistol? If you had 3 augments focused around Mythic Munition, that's what it would feel like, maxing out the starter pistol. But other than that, augments were pretty lame. They weren't really that great. And a lot of people, especially my friends, kind of forgot to accept their augments half the time. Anyway, so I've already got into melee weapons, and I feel like the melee weapons and the kinetic boomerang were great. They had a lot of personality and uniqueness to them. They were a highlight of Chapter 4 despite their own problems of mobility item reliance. So let's get into the other items of Chapter 4. New vehicles and ranged weapons. I'm just gonna flat out say it, they were reskins of each other. So, essentially, the Nitro Drifter and the Nitro Fang were the same vehicle. They were the same vehicle, and I'm gonna stand by that. The Nitro Drifter was basically a prevalent if you gave it a drift of an ATK. Which is okay, it's right, it's fine. I mean, prevalents were cool, but Nitro Drifter is just a better prevalent. And then they added a Nitro Fang, which was literally just the Nitro Drifter, but not the Nitro Drifter. They were basically the same vehicle, just reskinned to fit the new season better. And the weapons were pretty much the same as well. You get things like the Havoc Pump Shotgun, and the Infiltrator Pump Shotgun. And these two weapons were basically just, again, the same pump shotgun that we've had. And then we get the Sharp Tooth, and the Sharp Tooth I have another point with in a minute as well. But, like, all of the shotguns weren't really trying to be unique. And the Assault Rifles didn't really do that either. None of the new weapons really tried to be anything different. When it came to... I can't believe I'm going to say this, because people are just going to call me a nostalgia-blind freak. Chapter 1, the weapons like the Flint Knock in particular felt really fun and unique because they had an interesting gimmick to them. The Proximity Grenade Launcher. And don't get me wrong, Chapter 4 did introduce some interesting weapons. I think the Sticky Grenade Launcher was a really good addition. That was something that I felt we needed in the game for a while. Things like that were cool. But when it came to the generic range weapons like shotguns and assault rifles and I guess SMGs, all of the new ones didn't really feel special. None of the new weapons felt special. They were just, oh yeah, this is a new weapon. With the sole exception of Twin Mag weapons. Twin Mag weapons are interesting. I think those weapons are fine. Because that's a new mechanic. Twin Mag SMG and Twin Mag Assault Rifle, I think, get a pass. The others do not. The others really do not. They are not that special, and they are not that unique. But anyway, combat caches. Another thing I've spoken to death about. I think supply drops are superior in every single way. The combat caches I really don't like because of the way they just land in, they take forever to open, and they downgrade over time. The rarity decay on those things happens so fast that, like, the second it lands, it starts counting down 30 seconds from it being legendary. If you don't make it across, like, 400 meters in 30 seconds, you are not getting that top tier loot. That's what supply drops guaranteed. Supply drops guaranteed that you would have top tier loot, either epic or legendary, when you opened them. Not combat caches, most of the time they were blue, because you couldn't get there quick enough. And not to mention, they take 45 seconds to open, leaving you vulnerable because it also notifies everyone that you're opening them. They didn't feel satisfying to open, and they dropped a shit ton of Slurp juice. You know, the main healing item problem of Chapter 4. Now, supply drops didn't really feel worth it to go for in the past because they didn't drop enough loot. So here's the solution. Buff supply drops. Just buff them. Instead of changing it to this stupid new mechanic that nobody really liked. I mean, if you like combat caches, good on you. A lot of people didn't. Just buff the supply drops. Bring them back, buff them. They were so much better than combat caches ever were. Because at least when you see a supply drop falling, you're like, okay, we have time to go get this. There's no loot decay. They say they open instantly. And just, they were so much better. Supply drops were just better. You could shoot them down, it was satisfying to shoot them down. Like, combat caches just didn't feel satisfying. I don't know why, like, other than the reason I specified, they just didn't feel right. And then my final point about gameplay flaws, which is weapons being changed to be consistent with their models. So this would be things like the SCAR and the MP5, in particular. So during Chapter 4 Season 1, all assault rifle models were changed to the SCAR. During Season 2, all SMG models were changed to the MP5. The P90 was cut, and the M4 assault rifle was cut. Why did they do this? I feel like the main reason was for consistency, and it's better for new players if all weapons look the same. And honestly, I get that, and I think that's a cool addition. I think that's great. Absolutely, go for it. But this also comes into a problem with the Sharptooth shotgun. The Sharptooth shotgun reused the Spaz model from the legendary pump shotgun, which I think, you know, fine, if you're separating the weapons, go for it. Like, turn old models like the Spaz into a new weapon. Cool, fine by me. At least it would have been cool if they actually went ahead and changed the Spaz on the pump shotgun. They did not. So now, when it comes to things like creative maps in particular, there's 2 pump shotguns, and you have to look at the name of the weapon and its ammo count to figure out if this is now a pump shotgun or a Sharptooth shotgun. Because heck if I know, they look the exact same. And I'm not really a fan of that. Like, either you change all of the weapons, or you don't change any of them at all. Because now you've got that inconsistency that just doesn't really feel right. It feels unintentional, and I don't really like that very much. But that's enough about gameplay. I feel like we've been talking for a while already. So let's get into storyline flaws now. And I've got a couple, because as a person who loves the storyline and studies it, this is a problem. The storyline is a huge problem right now, and I think everyone can agree on that. So, the first one is the constant, we are so vulnerable, or the last reality is coming. Every single season, we've had that kind of overarching threat of like, oh yeah, something dangerous is on its way, guys, we need to do something about this. We need to move away, guys. I promise, guys, we're gonna have an invasion soon. We have an incoming threat, guys. Where's the incoming threat exactly? Heck if I know, if you're on about Cato Thorn, whatever the hell his name is, then we'll get to him in a minute. But every other just kind of build up to the last reality, or whatever this overarching threat is with Chapter 4, they never gave us that threat. They kept going on and on about this is gonna happen. Did it happen? No. And then, of course, all the main characters were killed off at the end of Chapter 3. All of the 7, with the sole exception of Paradigm, were chromed. And Paradigm supposedly killed herself with Zero Fusion as a sacrifice to rebuild the island. Which, respect, honestly, respect. But then, of course, Geno had his own overarching plot thread after dying in Zero War, which, by the way, Zero War is canon, and I do want to make that perfectly clear now, because it will be relevant to this. So, what happened was, Geno was kind of torn apart by the Zero Point like the Imagined was, and after those two went off to after Foundation and Jones went off to, like, find Geno, they find him, he supposedly dies, they go back, and Vibin happens. They're back in Reality Zero. That whole plot thread shown in game was basically irrelevant. And Geno didn't even die. He was rebuilding himself from all his atoms coming back to him through different realities. So Geno is still alive, he's rebuilding himself. But with Chapter 5 having a supposed reboot, all of our overarching plot threads are gonna be left unfinished. And I don't really know how I feel about that. So Geno rebuilding himself and coming back to the island for revenge? Nuh-uh. Never would have happened. Geno's gonna be alive. Amy going off to save the scientists from the Chrome? And all the other 7 as well? Doesn't matter. Amy never existed. Paradigm's plan that was talked about during Chapter 4 Season 1. We never even knew what that was. Again, last reality coming? Doesn't matter. They never invaded in the first place. Stellan getting threats from the Shapeless Man? Doesn't matter, because Stellan was never in Reality Zero to begin with, because Zero Fusion never happened. All of these overarching plot threads are just gonna be scrapped. And I feel like that sucks, because we really need to follow through with characters like Jenna and Amy, but we're not going to get those, are we? And then, of course, going back to all the main characters being killed off, Thorn. You're telling me the main antagonist of Chapter 4 was killed off through quest dialogue by a Fortnite crew outfit, and not even a main relevant character to the storyline? Not Sloane, not Jones, but Shimmerdusk, a random character who we're never gonna hear from ever again, killed off the main antagonist of Chapter 4 in quest dialogue. We didn't see it happen. No event, no cinematic. Just, oh yeah, we killed him, guys. Don't worry about it. He's gone. Just, why? It kind of made Last Resort feel like there were no stakes. Which was dumb. And then we got, again, going back to Stellan and the Ageless, what happened to those two? Like, the Ageless was a snapshot of Jenna, a younger snapshot from the earliest form of the Imagined Order. You know, we were rebuilding the IO as the storyline. What happened to that? Where'd Stellan go? Going back to the whole, oh yeah, these plot threads are unfinished and won't ever be completed aspect. And not to mention, the story of Chapter 4 felt disconnected between seasons. Every season was irrelevant to the last one. So, Oathbound, the Rift Gate was sabotaged by Evie to let the Peace Syndicate and Mega City come onto the island. Which, I mean, fine. But none of that ever tied back into Oathbound. And then, I guess, apparently the power of Mega City caused the jungle to form, but the jungle never tied back into Mega City. Never tied back into the Peace Syndicate. And then Sloane was back, so the storyline kind of re-kicked off back after Collision. Sloane survived Collision after Paradigm crushed over the tank, and with that kind of happening, Sloane's just like, oh yeah, screw the IO, I'm gonna help people now. And that's fine. Like, cool, bring Sloane back. I'm happy about that. I'm one of the few people that actually likes Sloane. But, like, again, Sloane just kind of lived. And then we went into Last Resort after she contacted either Jones or Nolan Chance. And then Sloane was absent for the whole of Last Resort. So, the main character didn't stick around. And then, so let's take a little bit of a sidetrack here before we get into Jones, because I'm pretty upset about what happened with Jones. Triarch Nox. They were setting up Triarch Nox to be a member of the Last Reality, kind of. And he was, you know, he was the saboteur, he was the one deleting all files on the Last Reality, only for them to change it to Dahlia. Like, why? What happened with Nox? Mega's storyline was just a mess. I don't even want to get into Mega's storyline, honestly. It was bad. But then, of course, we followed through with the whole Nox thing with Triarch Aurora, with more quest dialogue. Only to find out that Nox was basically persuaded by the Nothing in the Last Reality. So he did have connections to them even if he wasn't originally a part of them. So why was Dahlia the saboteur? Like, I don't even know. But anyway, Jones. You're telling me that after Fracture, Jones was floating around in space for 9 months? Your excuse for Jonesy not returning to the storyline is that he just landed on the island after Fracture? So, after all this time, everything going on Reality Zero, Jones has just been watching from space, slowly floating towards the island over a course of 9 months? How is he even alive? Not to mention Amy. Amy had contact with us during Chapter 4 Season 1, when she and Jones were together for Fracture. So you're telling me that Jones was there for Chapter 4 Season 1 with Amy and didn't say a word? The storyline is a mess with Chapter 4, so I am kind of glad they're rebooting it. I just really wish they would follow through with the storyline plot threads that they're never going to finish now. There's so many problems I have with Chapter 4, it's so... oh my god. But that's basically all the reason why I think Chapter 4 sucked in particular. And look, I'm gonna say this now. I don't think Chapter 4 was terrible. I know there's quite a few people out there who stopped playing during Chapter 4. A lot of people who thought the game had a lot of issues, and because of that, they just didn't like the game. I still loved Fortnite. I still loved Battle Royale, no matter what. Like, my PC as well is awful. It did not handle Chapter 4 performance-wise very well. But I still enjoyed it. I did enjoy Chapter 4. I never stopped enjoying Chapter 4. But I do kind of admit it did suck in a lot of aspects compared to the prior chapters, and I'm really hoping that Chapter 5 takes more notes from Chapter 2, in particular. Like, I'm not nostalgia blind by Chapter 1, like a lot of people are, and don't get me wrong, Chapter 1 and Season OG definitely did open my eyes. It did open my eyes to how simple the game was back then, and I do feel like this is the most fun I've had in the game in a while. But I'm not going to look past the amount of issues Chapter 1 has as well. Chapter 1 has a lot of its own issues in terms of its landscape, its POIs, and its own form of repetition. But the main thing about Chapter 1 that I do think it did really well is it had a lot of personality and art style to work with. I feel like Chapter 2 had its own art style as well. It had a more modernized art style, and I like that. I still think Chapter 2 is my favorite chapter of Fortnite altogether, even if Chapter 3 had the best story in my opinion. I just kind of hope Chapter 5 is a mix of the best parts of 2 and 3, and it doesn't go the same direction that Chapter 4 did. I really hope they have a good overarching storyline again, but deep down I know that's not going to be the case, because Fortnite is growing into a platform now, especially with UEFN, and again, I'm not going to get into the mess that UEFN has in the community. A lot of people are very upset about it. I'm one of the few people who really isn't that upset about it. But I do see the problems with UEFN, and I am kind of happy that Fortnite is branching away from a Battle Royale. But I'm still going to love Battle Royale, and I really hope Epic doesn't get rid of it for quite a long time. I want them to keep supporting the game, because I genuinely really do enjoy Battle Royale. I play it pretty much daily, because, I mean, UEFN is my job. I work with Alliance. Like, I need to work on maps pretty much daily. So, generally, Fortnite is one of the few only games I actually play, because I play it for fun and for work. And yeah, that can lead to burnouts at times, and maybe that's why I don't feel so strongly about Chapter 4. But that's just how it is. Anyway, that's a rant video over. This was completely unscripted. I genuinely have no idea how long this is. But whatever. Anyway, that's it for today. So, thank you guys for watching, I guess. If you have your own conflicting opinions, leave a comment down below. And whenever I do my next video or stream, I will see you guys then. Goodbye.